A few of you have asked me how I got into illustration, so today I'm going to do my best to answer that question, as well as how I found my style, and any advice I have to offer. Alongside some drawing, of course. First, I wanted to preface by saying that no two people's paths in career or life are the same, and although what worked for me may not work for someone else, hopefully my perspective offers a little bit of insight. Secondly, illustration is a pretty small but broad industry. What I mean by this is that I can only speak to editorial, commercial, tech, and a little bit of motion design, as those are the sides of illustration I have the most experience in. But it's important to remember that there are definitely lots of channels for an illustration career, like publishing, education, gaming, concept art, storyboarding and animation, etc. That said, how the heck did I become an illustrator? Well, grab a snack and settle in because I'm about to take you through the past 6 years of my brief illustration career. In truth, I never majored in illustration in college. I didn't go to an art school. I attended a few state colleges and eventually a city college in New York, where I'm originally from. My major was graphic design with a focus in web design. Believe me, I do not miss coding or grids. I did, however, take 2 illustration classes as electives. Shout out to my professor, Ricardo, who still answers my questions every now and then. Because my mom is such a diligent saver, and possibly the fact that I'm an only child, I was able to graduate without any student loans, which is a hugely privileged thing. A million thank yous to you, Mom. After I graduated, I worked as a freelance graphic designer for about 4 years, until I realized it was making me miserable. All the while, I still kept my practice of drawing for myself, which had always been a passion of mine since I was a kid, and the thing that I subconsciously used to self-soothe. At this point, my partner at the time suggested that I make illustration my career instead. This may sound like a small thing to you, listener, but for me it was immense. From a young age, I'd been taught that it was impossible to make a living as an artist or any art-adjacent career, so following my dream seemed like the scariest thing in the world to me. It must seem like a trifle, however, overcoming this disbelief in self was probably the biggest hurdle of my career. I was 26 years old at this time, and over the next year, I developed an illustration portfolio with the aim of cold emailing clients. Probably the most important part of this process, I drew things that interested me like mythology, figures moving through space, such as dancers and skaters, and plants, of course. Many illustrators of that time were of the bent that an illustrator must have a particular style, so I began cultivating pieces that seemed cohesive, while doing my best to cull any pieces that seemed weaker or I didn't particularly care for. Let me just add a little caveat that these days I don't think you need a singular style in order to find work. But I'll spare you any further thoughts on that for now. To dive a bit deeper into how I found my style, since a few of you have asked, the most basic answer I can give is that I just drew a hell of a lot. That sounds really dumb though, and it's not the whole story, of course. At this time, I had my own array of favorite artists and illustrators. However, most of them were contemporary. While it's common for beginners to mimic their favorite artists, it certainly doesn't set your work apart to learn someone else's visual vocabulary. I struggled with this aspect because it can sometimes be hard to break away from the art you ingest, and mimicry isn't always intentional. But I think what ended up working for me was casting my visual references net a bit wider by studying cinematography, fine art, type design, comics, photography, and fashion. Finally, something clicked for me when I saw a figure skating performance and was captivated by the skater's line of motion. Afterwards, I attempted to chase that line by depicting foreshortening and exaggeration of proportion. This breakthrough was further cemented by my first time taking part in the Inktober Challenge, which made me draw every day and use the momentum of my discovery to explore different ways of playing with exaggeration and proportion. It also made me focus particularly on these things since part of the challenge of Inktober is the constraint of limited to no color. I was still designing part-time, but also amassing a list of art director emails from internet sources and scarfing down every stray blog post and article I could find about becoming a freelance illustrator. In addition, I followed a lot of illustrators on social media and watched how they seemed to be conducting their careers. As to how I created my list of AD contacts, I would pay attention to the posts of other illustrators, which often included the name of the art director they had worked with on the project. After familiarizing myself with ADs I wanted to work with, I'd go to Illustration Age's list of ADs, which is no longer up, but I'm definitely not advocating that you go on the Wayback Machine and find the old list from a few years ago. No, definitely not. Beyond that, I briefly paid for a service called Agency Access that had a list of AD contacts. But I still think you could find contacts for free by doing what the Dear Art Director Tumblr advocates and finding people through the dark art of Googling their name or stringing together the right email address combo. Dear Art Director was also a really great resource for me when I was starting out, so I definitely recommend you checking them out. Eventually, I had to get over my profound social anxiety and profuse stress sweating when it came to contacting art directors. Taking the advice of what professional illustrators had posted, I printed a bunch of postcards with my work, website address, and socials on them, and began cold emailing clients. The first official year of my illustration career, I would email roughly 20 ADs a day for about a month, about 3 times a year, while sending out 250 postcards, also 3 times a year. I repeated this process for about a year and a half, sending artwork out into the ether and hoping to find some signs of life. Most emails and postcards never got a response, but the ones that did respond back absolutely delighted me. At the time, it was insane to me that they would take a chance on an absolute newbie like me, and I did everything I could to give each assignment my all. Looking back now, however, these are all pretty low-paying editorial jobs. Somehow, that first year back in 2016, I managed to land 26 client jobs. Each time a client commissioned me, I'd do whatever I could to make it a portfolio piece. In this way, I would post the work on social media, and as new potential clients saw it and hired me, the work would then snowball. I didn't say no to any new projects, and as you can imagine, I started to burn out after a year and a half of this. Because of the solitary nature of this job, I also felt very isolated. But this also propelled me to make some Illustrator buds via social media. While social media can be a double-edged sword and helpless, I am at least grateful that it's led me to meet a bunch of friendly and supportive people. Not only is it wonderful to be inspired by other artists and have that network of support, but it's also great to compare notes, commiserate, and pass along jobs to one another. By fall of 2017, I had submitted my work to the Art Directors Club Young Guns and somehow made it to the round of finalists. While I didn't end up becoming a young gun, it was shortly before all that a recruiter from Facebook was looking to fill an illustrator position. After an intense round of interviews that included flying out to the Menlo Park campus, I got the job. Moving out to California alone was intimidating to me, but it was something new, and although the first 2 years of illustration were incredibly lean for me, working for big tech offered a steady paycheck and a substantial increase in income, as well as health insurance. I worked in tech for almost 2 years, racking up a lot of interesting experiences and padded my tiny personal creative community with new friends. The flip side of all of this is that I was still freelancing on the side and continuing to build up my client base. After work, I would go home and freelance. On weekends, I would work on even more freelance. You get the picture. Although my imposter syndrome was tempered a bit over time, my burnout was becoming unbearable. In my heart, I knew this lifestyle was deeply unsustainable. What I truly wanted was to pick the clients I got to work with and devote my energies wholeheartedly to my art. For this, the best option was to return to full-time freelance. Eventually, I made the decision that I had learned all I wanted to in my then role and handed in my 3 weeks' notice that I'd be quitting. I sold or gave away many of my meager belongings and rented a car to drive across the country with my remaining furniture and houseplants on a solo road trip from the Bay Area to New York City. Trooper that she is, my mom flew out to help me pack before I left and also flew chow bag, since 10 days is a long time for a cat to be in a car. A few of my main goals for moving back to my native city were restarting my freelance illustration career to go full-time, being closer to my loved ones, and being part of a creative community. Also, I just really love New York. I mean, the pizza. Little did I know that the pandemic would hit just 6 months later and New York City would become its epicenter. Luckily, those 6 months were enough time to at least double down on freelance clients. Because I'd sustained my practice on the side, even with my full-time job, picking up where I'd left off 2 years ago was easier than I thought it would be. I'd also been grinding and earning those experience points, and now that I had more confidence in knowing what I was capable of, negotiating for fairer prices. Although work did slow initially after shit hit the global fan in March, things picked up about a month later when agencies realized that advertising would have to depend a lot more on animation and illustration. I'd also managed to get a really lovely illustration agent after commenting on one of Handsome Frank's Twitter posts, and they took notice of my work. This definitely padded the amount of work I was already getting and helped me feel a little bit more secure in my freelance practice. And that's pretty much where I am now. Please know that even though my experiences illustrate a lot of burnout and overwork, I definitely don't advocate that kind of lifestyle. Just save your body, soul, and personal life from the pain. If I were to offer any advice to anyone getting into this field, it would be to just keep going and keep making the things. For a long time, I had an almost debilitating lack of self-belief. Even at this point, I still haven't managed to shake off the imposter syndrome. Weirdly enough, that makes art making very hard. But speaking from experience, I'm glad I managed to keep going, and I'm grateful to my support system of friends and family for continuing to gas me up throughout the years. What also really helped me as someone who started out in this field a bit later was to set actionable goals for myself on a daily, monthly, and yearly basis, especially because my portfolio wasn't coming out of a curriculum. The other thing I'd say is always meet your deadlines to the best of your ability and be kind to people. Something that's really helped me as an artist and a person was just to make friends with other creatives. Like I mentioned before, not only do my friends and I support each other at times emotionally and career advice-wise, but we inspire each other and share random memes and shit that just makes the ills of this industry a bit more bearable. And don't forget, being kind to people also includes being kind to yourself, so treat yourself with compassion. Chow and I think you deserve it. Anyway, that was a lot of talking about myself, but I hope it was helpful in some capacity. As always, thanks so much for watching. I love reading each of your thoughtful and supportive comments. They truly brighten my day every time I read them. Till next time.